Welcome to this Machan Shiur. We're in the middle of learning Choshen Mishpat. We're coming to the end of Hilchos Dayanim. Today the Shiur is on siman Chavav, which is a very famous siman with a very famous discussion all about, as the title of the siman in the Shulchan Aruch is, Sheloi Loden B'dinei Goyim, to not be judged by in secular courts, but judged by, in other words, to be judged by Goyim. Colloquially, this is referred to as the issur of Arkaos. Arkaos means places of gathering, but it refers to places where Goyim gather to be judged. In other words, the issur of going to secular court. This shiur, what we're going to cover is the source for the issur of Arkaos. We're going to talk about the extent of the issur. We're going to talk about the concept of heter Arkaos, where sometimes it actually becomes permissible to go to Arkaos. We're going to talk about when that is, what are the limitations for heter Arkaos, how does it come to be, and then we're going to conclude with a few other related dinim to this whole discussion. That being said, let's jump right in. We know that there is a command in the Torah, or let's say like this, the pasuk in the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim says, "Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem." These are the ordinances that you shall place before them. And the Gemara in Gittin, Daf Kesselman beis, the Brisa says, it takes note of the interesting phraseology of the pasuk. What's asher tasim lifnehem? You shall place before them. You say, give to them. Give to the Yidden. What's placed before them? So the Gemara learns out from that, amongst many. The Brisa learns out from that amongst many other dinim as well, which we're not going to get into today, which we have spoken about in the past, which is lifneihem veloi lifnei goyim. That cases that arise between two Jewish people, disputes that arise between two Yidden, need to be brought lifneihem, before them. In other words, before beis din, veloi lifnei goyim, and not in front of goyim. This is the source for the what's really an, at least according to most shittas, it's an assay, because lav habom and klal assay is considered an assay, and therefore, in other words, even though it appears to be a prohibition not to go to a non-Jewish course, but effectively it functions as an assay, which is a positive command to only go to be judged before beis din, before Jewish Dayanim. That's the makor for it. There is another makor which is brought also by the Shevet HaLevi in a tshuva, where he says that we learn out from the pasuk Ad Elokim Yovid Var Shnehem, which is a pasuk which is talking about coming to beis din, but the pasuk uses the word Elokim as referring to beis din, and he basically, the Shevet HaLevi learns from that when there is a dispute between two people, it needs to be brought to the equivalent of Elokim. In other words, people who are Yerushalayim, Dayanim, Yidden, etc. Going to Arkaos, going to secular court does not constitute ad Elokim Yovid Var Shneim. But anyways, that's just a side point. The main raya, the main source for this issur is this pasuk Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. And even if you look, even not withstanding the Gemara, if you look in Rashi, Rashi on the pasuk, Rashi says lifneihem. Rashi says Ve'lo lifnei goyim, not before goyim. Now, what's the issue? What's the issue with going to Arkaos, going to goyim? So, like I said, Rashi explains. Rashi comments on the pasuk lifnei ve'lo lifnei goyim, not before goyim. Even if you know that in this matter they are going to adjudicate it the same way that a Jewish court would adjudicate it, in other words, the law is going to function the same way, al tivi'ehu b'arkaos shelahim, do not bring it to their courts. Why? Because someone who brings dinei Yisrael before goyim, mechalal es Hashem, it's a chilul Hashem, one is desecrating the Eibishter's name, umiyaker shem avodah zarah lahashpicha, and they are glorifying the name of avodah zarah to praise it. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, that our rock is not like their rock, that they should judge us, that our enemies should judge us, that when our enemies judge us, this is a testimony to the greatness of their deity, of that which they revere. And all the poskim, all the mefarshim understand that this is not an issue which is strictly related to avodah zarah. In other words, even goyim who do not worship avodah zarah, who are simply secular, falls under the same issue. The point is that when one chooses to not go to beis din and rather chooses to go to a secular court that is miyaker shem elili miyaker shem avodah zarah. One is a glorifying the name of that which the goyim revere, which is not the Eibush, and therefore it's disrespectful to the Eibush to do that. That's one reason given. Another reason is given by the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchas Sanhedrin, Perek Chavav Halacha Zayin, the last halach in Hilchas Sanhedrin. The Rambam writes as follows. Let's read through it because it's Nageya, and the Mechaber quotes part of it. The Rambam says, Kol Adon b'dinei Yakum v'Arkaos shalon afal pi she'adon sheha yudineim k'dinei Yisrael. Anybody who is judged by non-Jewish judges or in their courts, even if, again, he says the same thing as Rashi, even if their judgments would line up with how a beis din would paskin, Haray's a Russia, that person is considered a Russia, and it as if he has cursed and blasphemed against the Eibishter. The Heirim Yad b'Toras Moshe Rabbeinu, and it is as if he has lifted up a hand against the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Shenemar, how do we know this? How do we know this is an issue? Shenemar v'ela mishpat mashtasim lifnehem v'loi lifnei akum lifnehem v'loi lifnei hedyotis. So that's something else we learn from the pasuk, that it needs to be brought before expert judges, not regular simple lay people. Concludes the Rambam, which I just want to point out just because it's relevant to what we'll discuss later in the Shiur. If the hand of the goyim is strong, in other words, you're living in a society where the Jewish people do not have autonomy. The Jewish people do not have the power to enforce their own rulings because the goyim's hand is strong, the goyim are in power. Ubaldinoi alam, and one's interlocutor, in other words, the person who one is bringing to court is obstinate, he's a bully, he's a powerful person, and he refuses to come to beis din. One is not going to be able to exact the money that he is owed as a result of going to beis din. Either this guy is just going to refuse to come to beis din, or he's going to refuse to heed the ruling of beis din. So then he should first go to the Jewish Dayanim, to beis din, to demand that his Baal Din comes to beis din, and if he does not, if he refuses to then come, he is allowed to get permission from beis din, and then go and literally save his money. In other words, get his what is rightfully owed to him as a result of going to Arkaos. But we're going to leave that on the side. We'll talk about that's effectively the source. That's heter Arkaos, but we'll deal with that in a second. So the point is, what we see is the Shema is basically explaining that by going to Arkaos, and this is also the way the Shema explains in Sifkot and Dalet over here, understanding the Rambam, that by going to Arkaos, one is being meir miyad b'Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. They're lifting up a hand against the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu in the sense that they're showing that the Torah is unable on its own to decide the halacha, to rule halachic matters, and furthermore, one is indicating that the Torah is not true, and rather to get to the a true result, one is required to go to goyim. So the point is that there's two reasons. Rashi, as we said before, Rashi says miyaka shema alilim, and the Rambam, who says that one is being meir miyad b'Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. These are two reasons for why it is issur to go to Arkaos. All the poskim accept both reasons, and you will see this in the Mechaber, he mixes the two over here. However, there is, just for the sake of explaining the Inyan, there is a nafkamina between the understanding of Rashi and the Rambam. At least there are a few potential nafkaminas, but one of them is, as some of the Noisa Kalim point out, is if one goes to Arkaos not to be judged, if one would simply go to a non-Jewish court for a pshara, for a compromise, or for mediation. So potentially there, according to Rashi, it's still issur because one is still being miyak by virtue of going to a secular court. One is already being miyaker shem elilim. One is already valuing the that which the goyim revere, their course, their system, etc. Whereas according to the Rambam, where the Rambam is worried about, the concern of the Rambam is maybe at b'Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, by not going with the law of Torah and accepting a different legal system, one is, again, being meir at b'Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. So if one goes and simply, for arbitration or mediation in a secular court, it's not necessarily a problem according to the Rambam, because it's not like one is saying the Torah is not true, I'm picking another set of laws. You're not picking any laws, right? You're just going to somebody who's going to mediate the dispute. Anyways, point is that's a potential nafkamina between the ways of understanding of Rashi and the Rambam as to the issue of Arkaos. But as mentioned, there are many nafkaminas, and anyways, as mentioned, all of the poskim accept both reasons, and therefore, in all cases, it's going to be issur. Let's move on to talk about something else. Let's move on to talk about what if there is a case where both parties to a dispute agree to go to Arkaos, right? Both the Toveh and the Nitva agree that they want their case to be tried in secular court. Generally, and in other words, just to make the question stronger, generally we have a principle in halacha that kol t'nai shebemomen t'nai kayam, that any condition that is made regarding money, the condition is valid. In other words, if two parties enter into a business contract with each other and they put whatever kind of t'nai, whatever kind of stipulation or condition into the contract, then and they both agree to it, it's binding. There's no reason why the Torah or the beis should see fit to take issue with that. So, for example, if they agree that in this case, generally, let's say a party would not have liability in a certain case, but they agree that, for the purposes of our transaction, assuming something goes wrong, you will have liability. That's fine. Tanai sheba moment, tanai kaim. So perhaps in this instance, we should say the same thing. These two people entered into a contract with each other, and they put in the contract that in case of a dispute, we're going to go to Arkaos. So the question is that allowed? So as the Mechaber points out over here, and as is brought down in earlier than that as well, this doesn't work, because the issue of going to Arkaos is not simply a t'nai shebemomen, it's not simply a stipulation concerning how they're going to decide issues of money, it's also an issur of Torah, right? So one is not allowed to make a t'nai that goes against Torah. So therefore, even though in t'nai shebemomen, t'nai kaim, in this instance, saying that they want to be judged by Arkaos goes further than that, in that it's actually a violation of Torah law, and therefore one would not be allowed to do that. What happens if the parties agree to go to beis, but they want that the beis should judge the case according to secular law? In other words, they agree they're going to come to beis, but they say that they want that beis should judge the case according to the principles of secular law, going further than even the mechanisms that beis would already recognize of secular law. In other words, going further than dina de malchus dina and minhag hasoichem, etc. In other words, these parties want that the beis should strictly look at it from a secular legal point of view, from a standpoint. So it's a major machlokes haposkim, and we're not going to get into it in the course of the shiur. You can look it up afterwards. I just wanted to point that out because it is a discussion that comes up. However, definitely, as I mentioned before, if the parties agree that they're going to go to Arkaos, that's not going to work as well. Another thing that the poskim mention that's not allowed is using Arkaos to threaten people. In other words, even if one is not actually intending to go to Arkaos, but one is holding the threat of Arkaos over somebody else, say, you better pay me the money or else I'm going to go to Arkaos, I'm going to sue you. That is also not allowed, because that's again an issue that's miyaka shem elilim. Not one is saying that this is the buck stops at the secular court, or b'meila it's going to be also to do that. There's even a diuk in the Mechaber that some of the Noise Kalim point out. The Mechaber says two things. If you look in Sif Aleph, the Mechaber says, he starts with Asa Lodin b'fnei Dayanus Akum, and then a few lines later he says, V'chol habo lidon b'fneihem. So first it starts, it's also to be judged, and later on he says, V'chol habo lidon, anyone who comes to be judged. Harei ze Rasha v'chulu. So some of the Noise Kalim explain that what's his lashon kol habo lidon. In other words, even somebody who doesn't actually intend to follow through on his threat, in other words, doesn't actually intend to follow through and be judged in Arkaos, but he's just habo lidon. He's just initiating the procedure so as to frighten or threaten his interlocutor. So that too is going to be an issur. It's not allowed. Fine. So the point is that in a nutshell is the issur, is the source for the issur of Arkaos. Two reasons for it: potential nafkamina, and then some other dinim with regards to what if the parties want to want Arkaos, they want beis din, but they want them to apply secular law. So how we deal with that? With that in mind, let's actually read Sif Aleph inside, and then we'll pick up the discussion, etc. So starts off the mechaber, and most of what we discussed till now is included in the mechaber. So it says the mechaber also lo din b'fnei dayanei akum, right? It's also to be judged by non-Jewish dayanim, and again, even though it says akum, which means over the kechavim masolis, but the understanding is that it refers to all goyish judges. Even if it's going to be a case which they're going to judge in line with how beis din would judge. Even if both parties agree to be judged before them, issur, it's still issur. Anyone who comes to be judged before them is a rasha, they're considered rasha. As if they have cursed and blasphemed and raised a hand against the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, continues the Ramah. Somebody who attempts to go to Arkaos, the beis have the authority to put him in a cherem until he stops doing them. So too, they're allowed to put in cherem people who encourage others to do that, to go to Arkaos. Even somebody who does not actually go to be judged before goyim, rather he uses the goyish Arkaos as a tool to get other yidden to be judged before beis din, which is what I spoke about before. Same thing, it's suitable to lay him out on a pole and give him malchus. In other words, it's issur as well. Now the Ramah concludes the halach with an interesting din, which is the machlokes, which starts with maharam and the maharik. I'm not going to get into it in the shiur because I want to speak more high level about just the general principles, but you can definitely see it in the Noisei Kelim and the beis and the Darkei Moshe, etc. So says the Ramah as follows: Misha halach b'Arkaos shel goyim v'nis chayv b'dinim. Someone who went to Arkaos and was found to be liable. But then he went afterwards and he summoned the other baldin to din Torah. In other words, he took the case to Arkaos. He didn't like the outcome of Arkaos, so he decided, okay, now I'm going to go to beis din. So what do we do? Says the Ramah, some say some say we do not listen to him. This is a shit to the maharik. Once you go to be judged by Arkaos, it's effectively a knas, right? Once you go to din Torah, once you go to Arkaos, the beis din no longer listens to you. You cannot come back, with your tail between your legs and say, "Oh, I want to be judged by beis din." It doesn't work anymore. But some say no. Then it's talking like no. We do listen to him. Unless that as a result of going to Arkaos, you caused your fellow baldin a loss. In other words, we will listen to him unless it's a case where basically you already won. Now you just want more money. In other words, he sued, let's say I sued somebody else in Arkaos for $100. And the Arkaos, the goyish dayanim, made him pay $50. So now I want to take my case to din Torah, to beis din, to get more money out of him. So you say, no. In other words, even according to the shita who says, niskakin loy, even according to the shita who says that beis din will hear a case which the original Toveya brought to Arkaos first, still it's only in a case where he didn't win anything in Arkaos. And the Ramah continues, how do we pass between these two shittas? Vasvarish and nearly ikr. The first shita, the hainu, that einis kakin loy, appears to be the halacha. Okay, fine. So that's basically the discussion in Sif Aleph. That's going to get to what we're going to talk about, all about the issur of Arkaos. Let's move on to talk about the concept of heter Arkaos. So, as we're going to discuss in Sif beis, and as we saw in the Rambam before, that in certain instances where it is not going to be possible to get one's what he is owed, one is not going to be able to get it from his baldin, one is allowed to go to Arkaos. So there's a few things we need to talk about. So the first thing we need to talk about is what's the mocker for this inyan, what's the mocker for heter Arkaos. Also, we need to understand what is the svara behind the concept of heter Arkaos. We're going to talk about, what's the procedure for when beis din will give somebody rishus. In other words, will give a heter Arkaos, and a few other things we'll discuss as well. Okay, so there appears to be two sources for the concept of heter Arkaos. The first source is a Gemara. The Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara is having a very interesting discussion where two Amoyroim were talking to each other about sayings that people, these folk sayings that people used to say, and they're talking to each other. Where do they come from? So one of them is so one of the exchanges that they have is as follows. So it's like this. The Gemara says like this. Omale Rava le Rabba bar Mori. Rava said to Rabba bar Mori, Menoho milsa da omri inshi. Where does this saying that people say come from? The saying goes as follows. Koris chavrach v'loy anach. If you call your friend and he doesn't answer you, Rami guda Rabba shadibei. Throw a large wall and throw it at. Take a large wall and throw it at him. So Omar Lei, so he said, what's the mocker for this thing that if you call your friend and he doesn't answer you, you should take a big wall and you should throw it at him? So he said it's a pasuk in Yechezkel. The pasuk in Yechezkel says, Ya tehartich v'lo tihart, because I purified you and you did not get purified. So mitum mosech lo tetahari oid. From your impurity, you will no longer be purified. So, Shaila, what is this Gemara talking about? That if your friend doesn't answer you, you should throw a wall at him. What's this talking about? So, the Rosh quotes Rav Paltoy Goin, and the Rosh says Rav Paltoy Goin says, this Gemara is the mocker for the concept of heter Arkaos. In other words, that where you call your friend, you call him to beis din, and he doesn't answer you, now you get to throw a big wall at him. You get to, you get to go to Arkaos, and with the power that they have, as the result of being the government, etc., you get to throw it at him. In other words, and it's the same pasuk. In other words, you didn't purify yourself. You didn't get purified from you remained impure after you purified. In other words, after being called to a beis din, you didn't go. So now, you're never going to be purified. You're going to have to answer in Arkaos. So that's the mocker, interesting mocker, but that's a mocker that is brought in halacha for the concept of heter Arkaos. Another mocker is brought by the Sefer Trumas, which is also gives a little bit of context to understand what the concept of heter Arkaos really is coming to do. It's also he brings another source also in the Gemara in Gittin Daf Pei Kesselman beis, which is the idea that where the beis din gives rishus for somebody to go to Arkaos, then there's no longer an issue of miyake shem elilim or being married b'teres Moshe Rabbeinu, because the Arkaos, the Goyish courts, are effectively functioning as the shluchim of the beis din. In other words, it's only also to go to Arkaos, right? Because Yakashem Elilim, or you're being married to Moshe Rabbeinu. But if beis din tells you to go there, so it's not a rejection of beis din. It's not a rejection of Teres Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not, valuing Shem Elilim Fakert. You're only going because beis din told you to do that. What's taka the pshat? So some people also explain that there's this concept called a Torah Chosal Nemoyin Sheisel. The Torah is concerned for the money of Yidden. Torah doesn't want that you should just lose your money stam. If you're owed money, you should get it. And Torah cares about the money of Yidden. So if you're owed money, but you can't get it because your baldin, is an alam, he's obstinate and he's refusing to come to beis din, so then you are allowed to go. You're allowed to go to beis and get a heter Arkaos, and then you can get the money that you are really owed. So that's the mocker for this concept of that's a mocker for this concept of heter Arkaos. two makars. Again, the Rosh, based on this Gemara of throwing a wall at your friend, and also this concept that the Arkaos function as the shluchim of the beis. Obviously not mama shluchim, I'm just using that as an expression. Again, what's going to be the nafka mina between the way you look at it? So l'choyre the nafka mina will be, and this really ties into a different machlokes. So let's preface with a different machlokes. Let's assume for a second all the conditions are met, which we haven't gotten into yet, but let's assume for a second all the conditions are met, and the beis din is ready to issue a heter Arkaos. So the question is, so in other words, I want to claim money from somebody and they refuse to come to beis din. All the conditions are met. The beis din is about to give me a heter Arkaos. They're going to give me permission to go to Arkaos. The question is, does beis din need to be sure that I am right in my claim in order to issue a heter Arkaos? In other words, let's say I'm claiming from somebody that he owes me $100. So does beis din need to know? Maybe they can't know 100%, but be fairly confident that I have what it takes to win the case in order to be able to issue a heter Arkaos, or not? Or is it simply that if I want to bring a case before beis din, and the beis din sees that there is some merit to the case, enough that technically they would be willing to try the case, but the other Baal Din, the Nitva, refuses to come to beis din, so the beis din will issue heter Arkaos, even if the beis din are not confident that I'm going to win the case. Now, I don't have a star, for example, or I don't have Eidim, whatever it is. So machlokes between the poskim. So the Nesivas paskins that in order for beis din to issue a heter Arkaos, the beis din have to be confident that the person can win, right? Versus many other poskim say that that's not the case. In other words, as long as the conditions for issuing a heter Arkaos are met, the beis din gives the heter Arkaos. I'm now going to go and take my heter Arkaos and go to beis din and be awarded money that is rightfully mine. I'm owed the money, but had the case been tried in beis din, I wouldn't have been able to win. Because sometimes the procedures for what type of evidence is accepted or what constitutes a good proof is different in beis din versus Arkaos. So doesn't make a difference. The other poskim say no, it doesn't make a difference. I'm still allowed. The beis din will still give me heter Arkaos, and I can go and collect the money. That's rightfully mine. Obviously, if the beis din, if the Arkaos, if the goyish Dayanim award me money that I don't really deserve, I'm going to have to give it back. Okay, that doesn't need to be mentioned. So, for example, if let's say the beis din, sometimes courts, if somebody delays paying money, courts, when they award the toveh, the plaintiff, money, they'll also require the nitva, the defendant, to pay interest, right? In other words, the guy lent you $100 6 months ago, and you kratzed around and you didn't pay. So now, in addition to having to pay $100, you have to pay some interest. Okay, so that if the goyish dayanim award their money, for sure he'll give it back, right? But in other words, because you're not allowed to take ribis according to Allah. But doesn't make a difference. Fact is, as long as I'm getting the money that I'm rightfully owed, even if I wouldn't have been able to win that case in beis din, nevertheless that's allowed. So, and the point is, that's machlokes between the Nesivas and many other poskim. So perhaps, at least this is where some of the Noisei Kelim explain, that perhaps this machlokes ties in to how we understand the concept of heter Arkaos. If you understand the concept of heter Arkaos, that the Arkaos function as effectively shluchim of the beis din, so then the beis din can only ever issue a heter Arkaos if they themselves were going to win. If they themselves were going to award the money. So in those beis din's going to have to do, before they issue a heter Arkaos, they're going to have to do the due diligence to find out if it, at least to arrive at some level of confidence that the toveh could win the case, and only then will they issue the heter Arkaos. Whereas, in other words, because the whole concept is based on the goyish dayanim being the shluchim of the beis din. Whereas if you understand like the Rosh, the whole concept inside a knas, right? Your friend doesn't listen to you, throw a wall at him. In other words, you're giving him a knas. So then the beis din is allowed to issue a heter Arkaos, and b'meile the tovei will be allowed to reap or be allowed to receive what is really owed, even if the beis din do not know for sure that the person would have been able to win the case had it come to actually being tried within beis din. Let's see that in Sif beis. Let's read Sif beis. Says the Mechaber as follows. They're going to kifa. Right, if the hand of the goyim is strong. In other words, the goyim have the ability and the authority to enforce their judgments. And the person who you're arguing with, your interlocutor, it's alam, he's powerful, he's a bully, and he's not going to want to give in. So you're not going to be able to get your money out through Yiddish dayanim. So what you need to do, you first need to go to beis din and demand from him like that. And then if he doesn't want to come, you get permission from beis din. And then you're allowed to get your money back from Arkaos. Okay, fine. We're running out of time, so let's just wrap up with a bit of a discussion about the procedure for when heter Arkaos could be issued. So, as we've learned previously in the beginning of Hilchos Dayanim and elsewhere, the way a beis din functioned is that the tovei will come to beis and say, okay, I want to, claim X, Y, and Z from this person. And the beis din will issue a hazmona, will issue a summons to beis din to this person. And if they do not heed the summons and they don't come to beis din, the beis din will issue another 2 hazmonas. And once 3 hazmonas have been sent, we know that the person received the nitva received the hazmonas, and he refused to come to beis din, it's considered mesarev ledin. And to various degrees, they basically put him in a chayrim, the shtar serev, shtar equal, whatever. We don't have to get into it. But the point is that it's at that point, after issuing 3 hazmonas, the beis din are then allowed to issue a heter Arkaos to the tovei to be able to go get his money. So the point is, beis din issues 3 hazmonas, assuming the person doesn't listen to any of them, then they're allowed to issue a heter Arkaos. An important point that needs to be mentioned is that for a heter Arkaos to be issued and for somebody really to be considered mesarev ledin, they have to be refusing to go to any beis din, right? If they say, well, I don't want to go to this beis din that was mazmin me, but I'm willing to go to a different beis din, that's not considered mesarev ledin, or b'meile, one is not going to be allowed. Beis din will not issue a heter Arkaos on the basis of the nitva refusing to come to their beis din. However, one exception to that is if the beis din see that the person is just stalling, or the person has no intention of going to beis din, whatever, and he's just saying, no, I don't like this beis din, and basically any beis din that is going to be suggested is going to say, no, I don't like this beis din, then they are allowed to issue a heter Arkaos. And the same thing applies for, even though we said before that the beis din have to issue 3 hazmonas before they issue the heter Arkaos, the same thing is going to be if the beis din see that this person is never going to come to beis din, then even after the first, then right away, they're already able to issue the heter Arkaos. However, most poskim say they should at least issue 1 hazmona. So in other words, they issue 1 hazmona, and right away, then they issue the heter Arkaos, because again, this person, as they can tell, has no intention of going to beis, of ever showing up in beis. So the point is, that's the procedure for when and how to issue a heter Arkaos. Okay, there's obviously a lot more to discuss about that, but we're going to stop there for today. So the point is, in today's shiur, we spoke about the issur of shaloi lodin b'dinei goyim, the issur of going to Arkaos, the mocker for the din, the reason for the din. We spoke about the concept of potentially heter Arkaos, what's the mocker for that, what are the parameters for that, what's the procedure, and when it is allowed, and what the beis din need to do before issuing the heter Arkaos. We'll stop there for today. Yasher koyach and atzlacha rabba.